And what I find really interesting that is also going on right now in the realm of sustainability is that it seems to me that most businesses are not calculating with a rising price for water. And that just means that the financial models for how you invest in reuse of water on site, for instance, is very immature. So you're just looking at what kind of monetary savings can we have from reaching this cubic meter water saving. The cost of investing in water reuse in production is very high. And the savings that you can get from that in today's market, where water is incredibly cheap, are quite low. So you need to put on a future lens in order to be able to actually quantify that, and quantifying what is the value at stake for our production. If we need too much water to reach our production targets, and the water is not there, then we have that unexpected downtime. Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk to experts and professionals about the decarbonization of the healthcare sector. And today I have two special guests on the show. I have my son, who is fast asleep on my belly now. He may want to take part in the interview. And then I have Simon, the producer. Welcome, Simon, the producer.
Thank you, Frederik.
You are going to interview me, so we have kind of switched the tables around a little bit like we usually do. And I taught you something new today.
Yeah, so you taught me an acronym called SCQ. And I'm going to ask a lot of stupid questions because I have never heard about this acronym before. What is it?
So an SCQ is a way to construct and dissect a problem into three different stages. The first, the S, is the situation, the C is the complexity, and the Q is the question that leads us to. And when you're working in management consulting like we are in Green Innovation Group, it's a very useful tool to position a problem, to say what is the situation, what is the complication coming from this situation, and what is the key question that we need to answer and that we need to find a solution for in the work that we're about to take on. So that's an SCQ. And it's something we work with a lot to also just to organize our own thoughts, but also to organize it in the face of the client.
So it's a tool in your toolbox in a way to find out what is actually the problem that we need to find the answer for, as you just said.
And it becomes second nature, much like you don't think about catching a ball or taking a step. You know, it's something that you just start organizing problems in SCQs, so you know how to communicate around them.
Okay. So if we take this method or a way of looking into a problem, let's dive into pharma production. So what is the situation regarding pharma production?
So what we're seeing on a global scale right now is that the healthcare sector is paying attention to decarbonization and to sustainability in a whole new degree or to a whole new degree. And that means that where before pharma production was characterized, it still is, but it was characterized by being able to meet production output requirements. So getting enough of the drug or the substance or the device into the market, out to the patients as fast as the patients are needing it in the other end. And there's been a number of different obstacles to that. One has been regulation and compliance, that you need to have this production in line with the local and global regulation and in line with whichever measures there have been for instance, worker safety, for environmental safety. And that has led to a very strong quality assurance focus in production. Because if you do not have that quality assurance, if you cannot assure that the product is the same, every time you produce a unit, it's the same as the previous one, then you're compromising the safety of the patient in the other end.
Okay.
And we cannot have that.
Absolutely not.
So that is one side of it. Another side of it is that if we do not meet the regulatory requirements, for instance, on particle pollution or water pollution or water cleansing or whichever measurements we might have, then we're also compromising the local environment and the safety for the people in the area if they're exposed to toxic chemicals or if they're exposed to pollutants in the air, etc. So we had this quality assurance that was looking at, of course, making sure the products were alike, they were similar. We were able to have hard evidence that it would work the same every time we gave this product to a patient. And then the second one being we were acting in accordance with the regulation. So what does the law say we can and cannot do? Then we had to do that.
So you basically had those two legs to stand on, quality and regulation.
You could say so, and you had to be compliant, of course. So it's it's been characterized by meeting the market demands whilst being compliant with regulation and quality. So what has happened recently is that a production division usually has to meet the demand from the commercial part of an organization in a pharma company. So the commercial organization is the one that knows which products are in demand, how many of them are we going to need to satisfy that demand, where will we need to increase or decrease our production capacity, our production output. Then the second thing is in pharma, research and development is quite huge. So being closely connected to what is being developed in research and development and what is put for clinical trials, etc., has also been a part of what production has had to orient itself towards. It has, the R&D unit cannot develop something that it's not feasible for the organization to produce. If they do, then they'll have to find someone who can produce it. And then sometimes you would acquire that company that has that production facility, or you would hire that capacity in what's called a contract manufacturing organization. That's also quite common, but that's a little bit out of the scope now. So what we're seeing in the market is that all of the patients, all of the practitioners are requesting sustainability in various shapes and forms. So we have the National Health Services in the UK, the NHS. They have said, you have to be aligned with the Paris Agreement for us to buy products or services from you by 2027. So that's quite firm. That's a very firm target. It's very easy to say, if you're looking at it as a hygiene factor, are you aligned with this?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Pretty simple.
Then we can categorize it that way. But then we're also seeing requirements from the rest of the world, where it can be requirements for packaging, requirements for the rights of the workers that are engaged. It can be requirements on protecting the natural environment around your factories. It can be about documenting that you're not using slave labor, or documenting that you have anti-corruption policies, or documenting that you're not contributing to tax fraud, or all kinds of things within the realm of sustainability or behaving ethically, you could say as well.
Yeah.
So it becomes quite a complex area that has a plethora of different requirements and sustainability indicators.
And some of these are just to be in good compliance, of course, but also just from political views and organizations coming with their point of view. This is the way you should do it.
It differs. So at the end of the day, if you're responsible for a production division and you're looking at sustainability requirements, the first thing you care about is compliance. So is this something that we have to do, or is it something that's nice to do? If it's something we have to do, then we have to do, or production stops and the patients die. That's the ultimate price, right? And we cannot have that. Okay, so have to, they're neatly organized, and the organizations in production are typically quite well equipped to meeting regulatory demand, regulatory requirements. They're good at that. But when new things occur, such as requirements for packaging to have recycled content in it, they're very ill-equipped to adopt to these kind of things, because they're not necessarily a have-to assignment, but in a way they actually are, or they
Yeah.
will become. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, production divisions have traditionally not been able to look that far ahead, considering the speed of development that we're seeing in the regulatory environment right now,
Okay.
where it's developing so fast that the requirements are really coming at a much higher pace. And that means the ability to adapt in the production unit is much more important. So the situation, to summarize, is that production divisions are typically very focused on meeting their output requirements so patients can get their treatments. They're very focused on meeting regulatory demands, so they're compliant in order to produce. They're not very well equipped to predict the future because they need to meet requirements. They need to make sure that the products have the certain quality that's necessary. And it's mostly dictated by the demand from commercial, the number of units they need to produce, and by R&D, what kind of devices or drugs are they going to have to produce in the future. And that just means that there's a very sharp focus on operations. If you talk to people in production organizations, they are always super busy. They're really stressed for time. They have too few resources because there's not a lot of people that are really good at being efficient in production. So the competition for labor is also quite fierce.
Okay.
And you have typically too few hands to do too many tasks. So that is a bit of what it's characterized by.
So this is also a question about talent acquisition. So you want to be the company with the most beneficial ways of doing things in perhaps sustainability in order to get the right talent to work for you.
It could definitely be a way to attract and withhold the talent that you attract. So you have the talent retention effect of it. So if we're moving into the complication, what is it that makes it complicated? Well, it is that there is a number one target, and that is meeting production demand. So simply just having the output that's needed every day. For most pharma and medtech companies, it means that they have 24/7 production. So they cannot have downtime in their lines, in their production lines. So they have a team that works 8-hour shifts 3 times a day, and they have constant uptime. So downtime, they're incredibly sensitive to having downtime. That also means that if you want to change something, let's say you want to introduce an electric boiler, that's one of the most popular ones. A lot of pharma and medtech production facilities have gas boilers that are powered by gas. They boil water so it gets warm enough. It can become steam or other things. And to switch to electric boilers is something that has a relatively short ROI in terms of CO2 emissions. And it also has a good CapEx model. It means that you're able to invest the capital in it and expect to get the return within a reasonable timeline. The problem is, in order to be able to install it, you have to shut down your production facility for long enough to take out the old gas boiler and replace it with a new fancy electric gas boiler. And the downtime is something you cannot afford. So mostly you will have planned downtimes during a production year cycle. But you cannot just do it tomorrow if you feel like doing it tomorrow. So that's one area that makes it more complex. And then, of course...
But can I just ask you a question? Because I don't know much about production, but this seems not very well planned ahead, that you're not able to have downtime because stuff happens. Things break.
And I mean, there's of course a lot of systems for that in place, and you have different ways of measuring what is our acceptable number of events that can happen for what amount of downtime can we then have and accept. So, a lot of things happen, and then, something gets stuck in a spray molding machine, and then you have to fix it, of course.
So it's not that they don't have downtime, it's just that the downtime they do have is actually planned ahead, or, I mean...
They plan very far ahead in terms of having scheduled downtime.
Yeah.
And then everything else is accident, borderline catastrophe. And then it's go fix right now.
Yeah.
Right this instant, this has to be fixed.
Okay.
So that also means if, let's say that you're producing a medical device and a higher number than what you can accept come out without meeting your quality requirements. It could be a spring that doesn't pop or something like that. There's a very low margin of error here, because in many instances, people's lives actually depend on this being absolutely accurate. Not mostly accurate. It has to be absolutely accurate. So the moment you ID that there's something that is not meeting quality requirements, then you have to go back and check every single step of the production line to figure out how do we meet those requirements again.
And then you have downtime.
Then you would have downtime, and that's very expensive.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
So that's kind of the enemy number one is unexpected downtime. That's what you really cannot have. And what I find really interesting that is also going on right now in the realm of sustainability is that it seems to me that most businesses are not calculating with a rising price for water. And that just means that the financial models for how you invest in reuse of water on site, for instance, is very immature. So you're just looking at what kind of monetary savings can we have from reaching this cubic meter water saving. So in terms of putting a price on water, most organizations seem to me to have not factored in the expected increase in the cost of water and availability of water. So by 2030, we're going to see a 40% gap between supply and demand for fresh water.
There's simply just not going to be enough clean water.
There will not be enough clean water.
Okay.
And one of the consequences that we need to look at here is how we're addressing that with industrial process water. Because if you look at it in today's market, the cost of investing in water reuse in production is very high. And the savings that you can get from that in today's market, where water is incredibly cheap, are quite low. So you need to put on a future lens in order to be able to actually quantify that, and quantifying what is the value at stake for our production. If we need too much water to reach our production targets, and the water is not there, then we have that unexpected downtime. Then we're not able to deliver the products and the treatments to the patients. And as I said earlier, we cannot have that. No. So I think that is one of the most interesting complications that we're seeing right now, that water efficiency has been notoriously underinvested, where energy efficiency is getting its shine. And
we're working on that.
Yeah, and most production organizations will have a relatively good grip on that.
Yeah.
But for water savings, that it's a whole different animal, because the savings will not show up in a P&L sheet, a profit and loss sheet. So it's very hard to justify a large material investment into water efficiency right now, unless you have on that future lens and say, okay, 8 years from now, 7 years from now, 5 years from now, what can we expect the water costs will develop to? I'm not sure the price on water is going to match the lack in supply versus demand fast enough, because of the way water prices are regulated. That's very different from one country to the next. But on a long enough timeline, it's going to be a very scarce resource. And therefore, we should be able to make a financial quantification of the worth of water in production and invest in new equipment that is more efficient accordingly.
Now we touch upon the situation, the complication. Now we're moving on to the question. So you also taught me a new term, HMW. How might we quantify the value at stake?
Yes. So I love the how might we, because it's such an open question that makes you kind of solution oriented, but still exploratory. So one thing we could work with in carbon when we're working on decarbonization is to say, what would our product portfolio look like if we had introduced a 200 euro carbon ton carbon tax, a 200 euro tax per ton of carbon emitted. If we set up a carbon pricing scheme and we calculate our business models off of that expected cost, if the carbon tax would be like that, we could do something similar for water. We could say, what if water prices double by a factor of 10 or increase by a factor of 10 in 5 years? What would our profitability then look like? What would our infrastructure investments look like? How might we justify a higher degree of reuse in production by looking at that? So really what we would need to do is to look at the prices that we're currently paying, the business models that we're currently applying, and then figuring out what would it look like in a different environment, much like we've done with the carbon tax. What does increased water prices mean to us? If we look at a scenario where water prices increase by factor 10, what kind of infrastructure investments could we make today in order to become more water efficient? What would the consequences be? What kind of regenerative measures can we implement now to maybe have on-site water collection, to have a reservoir, a basin where we collect rainwater, we store it. Maybe we build topsoil on our facilities in order to help mitigate climate change and be a bit more resilient towards droughts.
Exactly.
It could be these kind of things that you can start asking yourself. And if you start asking those questions, if you start looking more to the future, I would venture the point that you are also going to be more attractive as an employer, because more talent, more skilled people are going to look at you as someone who cares, someone who is sensible, someone who is future-oriented. And that should dramatically increase your retention rates for talent, and also put you ahead of the curve in talent acquisition.
So there's actually one thing is planning ahead in terms of resources, but also planning ahead in terms of getting the right talent to, as you said, apply for the job or keep working at said company.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the too long didn't read on this is that requirements to production is changing faster than production actually has a capacity to change at. So we need to think outside of the box. And in order to make the right decisions and to prioritize the problems, we do need to quantify what's the value at stake. And when we know that, we can choose which battles do we want to fight. Do we want to go into waste sorting? Do we want to go into water efficiency? Do we want to go into energy efficiency? Or what focal points should we choose for our operation?
Yeah. And I just listed a bunch of things to go into, but is it also just okay to only go into one of them, or?
I'd say those three go without question. Decarbonization, looking at your energy consumption and significant energy uses. Water consumption, looking at your significant water consumers, and then your waste production and your waste streams, figuring out, are we burning the waste or is it becoming something more valuable at the production gate? So those are the three main areas I would look at. But of course, there's
many more.
A lot more areas you could look at, but those three key areas would be my focal points.
Okay. Well, thank you for teaching me many new things, a new model of asking the right questions towards finding the right solutions, and also now addressing the water problem that we're going to have in the future. I was actually not aware of that.
No, it's a problem.
I'm going to do something about that myself. But I do collect rainwater.
Cool. That's very cool.
All right.
Not too many Danes do that.
No. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast, and thanks for bearing over with my son being here in the studio. His mom just got her driver's license, so we're really excited about that. And Please do remember to like and subscribe and share the podcast. Last year, we were amongst the top 5% most shared podcasts on Spotify, so we hope to do that again in this year, 2023. If you have any questions, please feel very free to reach out to us in Green Innovation Group. We're really happy that you're listening. Cheers.